Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome back Tomi Mitchell. She is a family physician, and she's the founder of Dr. Tomi Mitchell Holistic Wellness Strategies. Her KevinMD article is titled Painful Physician Burnout Truths. Tomi, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much.
So I think we last spoke, I was looking back in November of 2021. And how have you been since then?
I have been doing great. I have been on my own journey of burnout, recovery, growth, and really just living my authentic life. So it's been a lot since we last spoke, but I mean, it's been amazing.
All right. Well, tell me about the changes. Tell me about the transitions you made.
Yeah, so back then I was running a busy medical center with multiple care providers, pharmacy, lab, x-ray, like I was gung ho. And then uh, we've had a pandemic since then. I had the realization that, you know what, I needed a break. And I took a pause from medicine. I sold what had become my identity, my medical center, me being an MD, and rediscovered myself, holistic healing, which is not all weird and herbs and cuckoo stuff people often think when they think of holistic. It's really looking at your life like at the wellness wheel. How are you doing financially? How are you doing emotionally? How are your relationships? And really evaluating that and empowering oneself. So it's been a lot, but I'm so grateful.
All right. So you said that when you made that transition, you had a little bit of a loss of your identity because for many, many years, you was known as a family physician and had a relatively traditional medical practice. Now, how difficult was it to face and process that loss of that physician or traditional physician identity?
It was difficult, especially at the beginning, because I had been known for that. And people are like, "Oh, Dr. Mitchell, are you retiring?" I'm like, "No, I'm not retiring. I'm taking a break. I am still a doctor. I'm just pausing." Because up until this point, I had run myself ragged. Like, I had two children and they were still like in diapers or pull-ups. And I didn't even take a break post having babies, post residency, post getting into medical school. Like from 2004, when I first started medical school till that current date, I was on the go because that's what we're trained to do. That's what we have to do. At least we tell ourselves.
So, what's your practice like now? Take us through a typical day.
Yeah, a typical day is I no longer run a medical center. I work there, so I pick my hours. I'm in the Canadian system, so it's a little different than at least when I was living in the US. So I run my hours, I see the number of patients I want to see, and then I might go home and like write articles. I'm working on a book right now that'll be coming out in the fall. I might get in a podcast. I might go for a walk. I might go do some physical activity. That's my day now. Spend time with my family, obviously.
All right. Well, sounds wonderful. And we're going to talk more about that and your Kevin MD article, Painful Physician Burnout Truths. Now, how did this particular article come together?
Oh, this came together basically a realization for my own life, right? Because when I finally pause and reflect, and actually when I finally decided to pause, it was
Yeah.
actually one of those moments where you were scolded for not being 100% available by a patient to
Yeah.
staff, and I got
Yeah.
wind of it. You know how that is? "Oh, the doctor's not available, that's my doctor."
Yeah.
It's and I just at that point, I was already hitting my head against the wall, but I was like, "You know what? This is what my response is gonna be. Here's my notice. 90 days, I'm done. Please find a new doctor." I did it, obviously, with more fluff and dignity than that, but I got my point across. I needed time to pause, heal from the trauma and stress of the past few years and even just working in this crazy healthcare system. Because this was post-COVID, well, post-COVID, so to speak.
So, was it a single event that made you take that pause? Was it the culmination of years and years of micro traumas in the Canadian medical system? So, tell me the events leading up to this decision.
Yeah, so it was micro traumas, but primarily the macro traumas. Like, I think I've written another article how I had a baby, well, had a newborn, and when she was 4 days old, she stopped breathing. Oxygen stats went down to 51, 60, 71. She was in the peds unit, and I remember being told it's just reflux. She's fine, and seeing my baby C's, and just not being listened to, as a female, even as a physician, but as a mom, woman of color, just not being listened to, and having horrible things happen to me, like almost bleeding to death, bleeding out to death, and people not taking it seriously. So that really made me snap, because that's hitting like the root of who I am, a mama bear, a mom. Like, you can do everything else to me, like as a kid in school and, you know, disappointments. But when it's my own cub, okay, that's when you cross the line. So the Canadian healthcare system is good, but it's far from perfect, and it varies depending on where you're living and where you're practicing. Some places like almost utopian, other places it's leaves much to be questions.
Now, did you consider any other options instead of taking that pause?
No, that was it, because I was burnt out. I had nothing left to give. Like, I didn't want to hear my name. The name Dr. Mitchell just made me cringe. Like, I didn't want to hear, oh, prescription renew. Oh, Dr. Mitchell, we need you. I didn't want it. I didn't want to see a document. I didn't want to do paperwork. I was done. And I stopped laughing. I'm the doctor that dances and laughs, and you can hear my,
Yeah.
my joy from a mile away. It was gone.
Hmm.
I had nothing left to give. So yeah, that was the only option, because I had ignored the warning signs up until that point, or at least I had buried myself under this responsibility that it was very challenging, at least I thought, to take a pause.
Now, what about your colleagues, your fellow family physicians up in Canada? Are they going through similar stories to what you just described?
Yes, burnout is rampant. Depending on the study you'll read, it can be anywhere from like 40% of physicians reported burnout to as high as like 70. So yes, they are, but the thing is, not everyone is recognizing that it's burnout. And I think the majority, perhaps they're not, and they're not maybe taking the steps necessary to really work on the healing process, because it really takes the brain 2 years to recover from burnout.
Now,
So, that's why I do what I do, and I talk about it, because I see some of my colleagues burnt out. Like, I see it, but it's a denial stage, or they just think this is normal, and they're missing out on joy and just life.
now, when you gave notice of your pause, what was the reaction of your medical institution and your
Oh my
colleagues? Because
goodness.
you're clearly mid-career and what should be the peak of your medical powers, and then you gave notice that you're going to take a pause. What was the reaction from your colleagues?
It was ginormous ripple effects. Where I was living then, basically, we have our like provincial capital, and I always call it the Marble Palace. My name was mentioned the following day in Parliament. Dr. Mitchell from such and such, she's leaving due to XYZ opposition. What are you going to do about it? Like, waves happened, waves.
Tell me more about that. So your name was actually mentioned in Parliament as a
Yeah.
spotlight on the
Oh, yeah.
tribulations that physicians are going through?
Oh, yeah. It was kind of like I finally was the one that just broke that glass, and people were after me. They really started talking about it, because I'm vocal for various reasons. But yeah, it was mentioned in Parliament, news, interviews, speaking, things came out of it. Like, people were asking me questions, because I don't sugarcoat things. I don't, people, so many people, well, not so many, some came up to me later, like, Dr. Mitchell, I'm so proud of you for saying that. And others were like, why would you say that? You're just putting yourself as a target. I'm just like, I was always a target. I was born a target. Like, what do I care at this point? This is the truth. And the truth needs to be known. And you know what? It's been over a year now. It was actually, I announced my resignation on International Women's Day. I think it was March 8th last year. And not a whole lot has changed from when I left. So I'm like, if I had waited there for, I was already finished one decade, going into the second, what would I be doing? Like, all the empty promises. I'm just like, ugh. But now I'm happy. People comment like, you look so good. Like, what's happening? You're so much happier. They're just in awe. Like, how did you do it? Well, it takes courage. It takes letting go of your comfort, like your comfort security blanket, and still having a plan, but having the faith and the desire that whatever discomfort in the transition that you might go through is worth it because the life you were living is not representing who you are and what you want in your life.
So you said that this happened about a year ago. Have you
Mhm.
noticed any changes within the physician community since your resignation?
I have noticed that people talk about it more, and I still get referenced
Hmm.
when clinics are closing. But in that community, I don't see a whole lot happening. And this is one of the truths with physician burnout. You have to recognize that some fights are worth fighting, and others you just need to throw in the towel and move on. And since then, I've moved on, and I work in a place that I love, great supports. And again, it's not perfect, but it's what you make of it. But if you have leaders that are willing to change and they put the facilities and services in to help the people, it makes it a lot easier. So yeah, it's all choices. We choose where we live. We don't choose where we're born, but you can definitely choose where you live and work. And that's the part physicians and other people need to recognize. You have a choice.
Now, how did you decide what you were going to do? So I know that you do take some clinic hours still here and there, but how did you decide what to do next? Because a lot of physicians, like you said, are tied up with that professional identity, and outside of that identity, they may not know what to do. How did you find that clarity?
Well, I knew what I wanted to do as a young child. Like I had this vision of myself being in front of a large audience. I was like 15 and speaking and making an impact. Like that, I cannot forget those like thoughts of visions I had in my mind, right?
Hmm.
So when I paused, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. Like, oh yeah, I did. That was something on my mind. But then, I get into high school, medical school. You're so busy, getting into school, getting into residency, establishing yourself. I lost myself. Like there were years where I didn't even read a book, and I was the girl that was an avid reader. And I used to love writing. I used to take AP English, though
Hmm.
AP is kind of like gone by the wayside, it seems these days. But yeah, I love to read and I love to write. I'm like, I had to find myself, and it was things that were outside or not necessarily directly clinical. So many individuals lose themselves in medicine. Their life revolves, their conversations revolve about medicine, their jokes are about medicine. And unfortunately, if you do that, you run a high risk of losing yourself in this career. And then when it drops you, when you realize you're replaceable by your employee, you're broken.
Now, for those other physicians who may be in similar places to where you were a few years ago, what kind of questions should they ask themselves to make sure whether a pause or a resignation or a break is right for them?
Yeah, so they can ask themselves, are they happy? Very simple. Truly happy. Are you doing things in your life that recharge you? Or when last have you done something in your life that recharged you? Right? Be honest with oneself. And that's really key. And be and ask yourself like what is contributing to the way I'm feeling? And don't just be like, oh, it's my job only. Don't get me wrong, my burnout was not just my job. It was multiple facets, but I took the time and I was coached and I, talked to people and I really dug deep. You need like a mirror in front of you, and that could be somebody else, a coach or mentor, to really help you tease that out. Because remember, you are programmed to basically be perfect. You have no fault as a physician. We do everything right and we do our best. And to say that we feel weak is a sign of weakness, and that is horrible, right? That's our unspoken code. But that's far from the truth. It takes strength to seek help. It takes strength to stand up for yourself.
We're talking to Tomi Mitchell. She's a family physician and she's the founder of Dr. Tomi Mitchell Holistic Wellness Strategies. Her KevinMD article is titled Painful Physician Burnout Truths. Tomi, tell us some of your take home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience.
Yeah, honestly, you have one life to live, and the only people who are going to remember you when we leave this earth will be your family. And what kind of legacy are you leaving behind? Are you spending time with them? How are your relationships? Like, that's what matters most, relationships. And that is everything. It's not the money in the bank. Don't get me wrong, it's great, but it's relationships and your happiness.
Tomi, thank you so much for coming back on the show and
Sure.
sharing your story time and insight.
Thank you. You're welcome.